one night with two Apache sisters, and the rancher was forever marked by their secret. The sun was just dipping behind the distant mesas, casting long shadows over the dry, rugged landscape. The air was warm but tinged with the coolness of the coming night. James McCall, a man in his late 40s with weathered hands and a lined face, worked steadily around his small ranch on the outskirts of Arizona. The ranch was not large, but it was enough for him. A modest collection of fields, a barn, and a handful of cattle that required his attention from dawn to dusk. James was used to solitude. After the death of his wife years ago, he had chosen a life of quiet routine, surrounded by the land he loved and the animals he cared for. The wind that swept through the open plains was his only companion most days, and he liked it that way. As he finished tending to the last of the cattle, James paused and wiped the sweat from his brow. He looked up at the sky, noticing the deepening shades of purple and orange. Storm clouds were gathering far to the west, moving quickly across the horizon. A rumble of distant thunder rolled over the plains, a reminder that even in the desert, nature had its own plans. James shook his head with a small smile, thinking about how unpredictable life could be. He moved back toward the house, passing the barn where a few horses shifted in the fading light. The smell of hay and dry earth filled his lungs, a scent that reminded him why he had chosen this life. Inside the house, the air was cool and calm, the small fireplace already lit to chase away the chill that often settled in once the sun went down. James poured himself a glass of water and sat in his old chair near the window. The quiet was comforting, almost sacred, in a world that often felt too loud and too complicated. Then, as he sipped his water, he heard it, a soft knock at the door. James frowned, surprised. Visitors were rare in these parts, and almost never after sundown. He stood slowly, muscles stiff from a day of hard work, and walked to the door. When he opened it, he froze for a moment. Standing there, silhouetted against the fading light, were two young women. They were clearly sisters, not more than 20, with dark hair and striking features that spoke of strength and resilience. Their clothes were simple but sturdy, worn from travel, and the storm clouds had left their hair damp. "Good evening," the older one said softly. Her voice was calm, yet there was a hint of urgency in it. We were caught in the storm. "May we come in?" James hesitated. He had learned to be cautious in his life, especially in the remote parts of Arizona where danger could appear in many forms. But when he looked into their eyes, he saw no threat, only a quiet determination and a hint of fear. Something in their expression told him they were not wanderers or troublemakers. He stepped aside. "Come in," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're lucky you made it this far. The storm will get worse soon." The sisters stepped inside, shaking off the cold rain and mud from their boots. James quickly fetched blankets and towels, handing them to the younger sister, who accepted them with a shy, grateful smile. The older sister nodded politely, her eyes scanning the small house with curiosity but without intrusion. They were careful not to touch anything unnecessarily, showing a respect for his home that James had not often encountered. Once they were dried off and seated near the fire, James poured them each a cup of warm tea he had prepared earlier. The steam rose in gentle curls, filling the room with the comforting scent of herbs. He noticed how they seemed to relax slightly, though a tension lingered in their shoulders, as if they were carrying some invisible weight. "You don't have to stay long," James said gently, breaking the silence. "Once the storm passes, you can continue on your way." The older sister shook her head. We cannot leave tonight. The storm is too dangerous, and we have nowhere else to go." Her voice was steady, but there was a quiet strength in it, the kind that spoke of people who had learned to rely on themselves no matter the circumstances. James nodded, understanding immediately. He knew what it was like to be caught in the middle of something beyond your control. "All right," he said, "you can stay. But I need to know something first. Who are you, and why are you traveling alone?" The sisters exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, the younger one spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We are just trying to find safety. That is all." James could sense there was more to the story, but he did not press them. Sometimes, trust had to be earned slowly, and he had learned that forcing answers often caused more harm than good. Instead, he simply nodded, giving them space. The three of them sat in the warmth of the fire, listening to the wind howl outside and the rain patter against the windows. James found himself stealing glances at the sisters, noticing the way their eyes seemed to carry a depth of experience far beyond their years. There was a quiet dignity in them, a strength that was almost palpable. He wondered what paths had brought them here, to this small ranch in the middle of nowhere, on a night when most people would have sought shelter elsewhere. Hours passed and the storm continued to rage outside. James found himself sharing small stories about life on the ranch, the difficulties of tending to the land, the loyalty of the animals, and the peace that solitude could bring. The sisters listened intently, their expressions softening as they absorbed his words. Occasionally, they would offer a small story of their own, fragments of life in their community, the struggles they had faced, and the lessons they had learned. But there was always a pause, a hesitation, as if certain memories were too fragile or too dangerous to speak aloud. Despite the mystery surrounding them, James felt a connection forming. There was something almost magical about the way their presence changed the room, a warmth that had little to do with the fire. He realized he was not just a rancher on a quiet night anymore. He was a witness to something rare and fragile, a fleeting moment that would leave a lasting impression on his life. By late evening, the storm had reached its peak. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the room in sharp, bright bursts. Thunder followed, shaking the walls and rattling the windows. The sisters huddled closer to the fire, their hands brushing slightly as they sought comfort from one another. James watched them silently, feeling a mixture of protectiveness and curiosity.
"Are you hungry?" he asked gently, breaking the tension.
They shook their heads, but the older sister's eyes lingered on the small kitchen. "We are fine," she said. "Thank you for your kindness." James nodded, sensing the weight of gratitude in her words. He had always lived a life of routine and simplicity, but tonight was different. Something about the sisters, their presence, their mystery, their quiet strength, was pulling him out of the comfortable solitude he had known for so long. As the night deepened, the three of them sat together in silence, the fire casting flickering shadows across their faces. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, there was a fragile sense of safety. James knew that this night, like no other before it, would mark a turning point in his life. He did not yet understand how or why, but a feeling deep in his chest told him that these two sisters, strangers in every sense, had arrived for a reason, and that reason would change him forever. By the time the wind began to die down and the storm moved further into the distance, James felt a strange calm settle over him. The sisters, now resting comfortably near the fire, seemed almost part of the house itself, as if their presence had always been meant to be there. James looked out the window at the clearing sky, stars beginning to peek through the clouds, and felt a quiet sense of anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, he knew the events of this night would remain with him forever, like a secret carried quietly in the heart. And so, in the lonely quiet of the Arizona desert, with the fire flickering softly and the storm finally moving on, James McCall understood something he had not known before. Life could bring unexpected visitors, moments of connection, and unspoken mysteries, sometimes all at once. And the night was only just beginning. The night outside the ranch had grown quiet, but inside, the small living room was filled with the soft crackle of the fire. James McCall had settled back into his chair, though he was far from relaxed. He couldn't stop glancing at the two sisters, Leela and Ayana, who sat on the rug by the fireplace. Their damp clothes had dried, and the fire's warmth had softened the tension in their shoulders. Yet their expression still carried traces of unease, as if some weight pressed heavily on their young hearts. James felt a mixture of curiosity and caution. He had lived most of his life in solitude, relying on his instincts and experience. Visitors were rare, and strangers even rarer. But there was something different about these sisters, something that made him want to listen, to protect, to understand. He wondered what circumstances had brought them so far from home, into the middle of a storm, and into his life. "Do you want to tell me about yourselves?" he asked, keeping his tone gentle, careful not to push too hard. "I won't force you, but I'd like to know who you are. It might make you feel safer here." The older sister Lila exchanged a quick glance with Ayana. There was a brief silence, the kind that carries its own weight. Finally, Lila spoke, her voice soft, yet steady. We come from a small community nearby. It is not far, but the journey was difficult. We had to leave quickly." James nodded slowly. "I see. The storm caught you along the way?" Ayana, the younger sister, nodded. Her eyes lowered. "Yes, we tried to travel before it came, but the clouds moved faster than we expected." There was a pause, and James noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched the edge of the blanket around her shoulders. She was clearly frightened, but not by him, by something else, something unspoken. James decided not to press for details. In his life, he had learned that some stories were told in their own time. Forcing answers could create walls instead of trust. Instead, he focused on the fire, letting its warmth fill the room. "You are safe here tonight," he said softly. "The storm will pass, and you can rest without fear." The sisters nodded, though their eyes remained wary. It was clear that safety was not something they experienced often. Their lives, James realized, had been shaped by challenges he could scarcely imagine. And yet, despite the unease in their expressions, there was a quiet dignity in the way they carried themselves, a strength that came from surviving hardships most people never faced. For a while, silence settled over the room. Only the fire and the wind outside broke the quiet. James took a slow sip of his tea and allowed himself to relax, just enough to observe the sisters. He noticed the small details, the way Lila's fingers nervously played with the edge of the blanket, the slight furrow in Ayana's brow, the glimmer of determination in their dark eyes. They were cautious, yet resilient. They were hiding something he could tell, but what it was, he could not guess. After several minutes, James decided to share a story, not to pry, but to help them feel at ease. "When I was younger," he began, his voice carrying the rhythm of long years on the ranch, "I used to travel across the desert with my father. We faced storms, heat, and nights colder than you could imagine. But it was also beautiful, full of quiet moments that made life feel bigger than yourself. That's what I love about this land. It tests you, but it also teaches you to see things clearly." Lila's gaze softened as she listened, and Ayana leaned slightly closer to the fire, warming her hands. For the first time, James saw a faint smile appear on Lila's face, fleeting but genuine. He realized that sharing stories, even small ones, had a way of bridging distance between people.
"You speak with care," Lila said quietly, her voice almost a whisper.
You make this place feel...
Safe. That is rare. James felt a twinge of emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Praise, especially from strangers, was uncommon for him. He shrugged lightly. It is nothing. I have a quiet life, but I know what it means to be alone, and I understand what it feels like to need safety. There was another pause, longer this time. Ayanna finally looked up, her eyes meeting James's. We have been alone often, she admitted softly. We had to learn quickly how to protect ourselves and each other. James leaned back, studying them.
You have each other, he said. That is powerful.
It makes a difference when someone watches your back. The sisters nodded. It was clear that family was important to them, not just the bond of blood, but the bond of shared struggle. They were survivors, and yet there was more beneath the surface. Something they had not yet revealed. James could sense it in the way they exchanged glances, in the quiet tension that lingered even as they tried to appear calm. As the storm continued outside, lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the room. James noticed a shadow of worry cross Lila's face at each flash, though she quickly composed herself. "What is it you are worried about?" he asked gently. Lila hesitated. "The world outside is not always kind," she said finally. "There are people who would not wish us well." That is all I can say for now. James understood immediately. He had encountered his share of danger, though it had rarely come to the isolated ranch he called home. Yet something in Lila's tone warned him that the sisters had a deeper story, one that could change everything if revealed. He felt a surge of protective instinct, one he hadn't felt in years. "You don't have to tell me everything tonight," he said. "You are safe here. I will not let anyone harm you, even if it means standing in their way myself." For a moment the sisters exchanged another glance, this one filled with unspoken gratitude. A faint sense of relief passed over them, though it did not erase the tension entirely. James realized that trust had to be earned, slowly and carefully, and he was willing to give it the time it needed. To ease the growing unease, he decided to continue with small talk, hoping to lighten the mood. "Do you like the desert?" he asked casually. "It can be harsh, but it has a beauty that few understand. The sunsets, the stars at night, the quiet, it teaches patience and respect." Ayanna's eyes softened at this, and she nodded slowly. "It is beautiful," she admitted, "but also dangerous. That is why we must always be careful." James smiled faintly. "That is true. Danger is everywhere if you do not respect it. But life is also full of unexpected moments, moments that remind you why it is worth living." He paused, feeling the weight of his own words. Sometimes those moments come when you least expect them. The sisters seemed to consider this carefully. There was a moment of silence again, this time more comfortable, less tense. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across their faces, and James felt a strange sense of connection forming, a fragile bond born of shared humanity and quiet understanding. As the night deepened, the storm began to subside, though the wind still howled outside, rattling the windows and bending the trees around the ranch. The sisters drew closer to the fire, their bodies seeking warmth, but also James realized a sense of safety that had been missing for far too long. "You are kind," Lila said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "It is rare to meet someone like you." James felt a lump in his throat. "I've had my share of solitude," he admitted. "But sometimes the right people come into your life unexpectedly. You never know what impact a single night, or a single person, can have." Neither of the sisters spoke after that, but the words seemed to linger in the room, filling the quiet spaces between them. James realized that this night, this storm, this unexpected encounter was something extraordinary. It was more than coincidence. It was a moment that would leave a mark on all of them, though none of them yet understood how deep that mark would be. Hours passed, and exhaustion began to settle in. James noticed the sisters' eyes growing heavy, their small gestures slower, more relaxed, as the warmth of the fire and the safety of the house overcame their weariness. For the first time that evening, he felt a sense of calm descend upon them all. As he watched them drift into a light, restless sleep, James realized that life had a strange way of weaving unexpected connections. The sisters had arrived unannounced, seeking shelter from a storm, but they had brought with them a presence that stirred something long dormant in him. There was a story here, one that had yet to unfold, and James knew that when it did, his life would never be the same again. The night stretched on, deep and quiet, and for the first time in a long while James felt that he was not entirely alone. He had been entrusted, even unknowingly, with something fragile and precious, the trust of two young women, survivors of hardship, seeking safety in a world that could be cruel and unforgiving. And in the silence, with only the fire and the wind as witnesses, James understood that this night, this storm, and these two sisters were only the beginning of a story that would mark him forever. The first rays of morning sunlight seeped through the cracks in the wooden blinds, casting long, soft beams across the room. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the storm of the previous night had moved on, leaving a crisp freshness in the air. James McCall had been awake for a while, sitting quietly in his chair by the window, watching the desert wake up. The wind had died down, leaving only the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds. But even with the peace of the morning, James felt a quiet tension in the house. The sisters had not stirred yet. They were asleep on the rug near the fireplace, wrapped in the blankets he had given them the night before. James observed them carefully. There was a calm in their faces now, but he knew from the way they had carried themselves the night before that something weighed heavily on their minds. Something unspoken. Something important. James decided to give them time. He rose quietly, careful not to wake them, and stepped outside. The desert stretched endlessly before him, golden and serene in the early light. The air smelled of wet earth and sage, a reminder of the storm that had passed. He breathed in deeply, letting the quiet calm of the morning seep into him. And yet, even in the calm, he could not shake the feeling that today would bring revelations, truths that would change everything. After breakfast, which consisted of simple bread, cheese, and fresh coffee, the sisters finally seemed ready to speak. The tension that had lingered the night before was now replaced by a quiet resolve. Lila looked at James, her dark eyes steady, her hands folded in her lap. There was a firmness to her expression that told James she had made a decision. "James," she began, her voice soft but deliberate, "there is something we must tell you. Something important." James nodded, leaning forward slightly, his heart beginning to race with anticipation. "Go on," he said gently. "Whatever it is, you can trust me." Ayana shifted slightly, her younger face full of apprehension. She glanced at her sister, who gave her a reassuring nod. Then she looked at James. "We are the guardians of something very important," she said carefully. "Something that belongs to our family and to our people. It is a secret that must be kept safe." James felt a chill run down his spine. He had not expected this. He had sensed a mystery, a tension, but he had not imagined the depth of what they were carrying.
I see.
he said slowly. Can you tell me what it is? Or at least why it is so important? Lila took a deep breath. It is a small artifact, she said. It may look ordinary to someone who does not understand, but to us, it is sacred. It carries the history and spirit of our family and our community. Many people would do anything to take it from us. That is why we must protect it, no matter what. James studied them carefully. He had never held anything like this in his hands, nor had he faced a responsibility of such magnitude. But he could see the seriousness in their eyes. This was not a story, not a trick. It was real, and the stakes were high. "Where is it?" he asked gently, trying not to sound alarmed. Lila and Ayana exchanged a glance. "We cannot tell you exactly," Lila said. "It is hidden, and it must remain that way. But we brought it with us. We feared that if we stayed in our community, someone would find out and take it. We believed you might help us, even though we barely know you." James felt the weight of their trust pressing down on him. He was a solitary rancher, used to caring for animals and land, not sacred objects and secrets that could endanger lives. But he also felt a surge of protective instinct he had not experienced in years. "I will protect it," he said firmly. "No one will harm it or you while you are here. I promise." A faint relief crossed Lila's face, though it was mixed with the ongoing tension of fear. "We do not know who is looking for it," she admitted, "but we know that there are those who would not hesitate to take it. We have already faced threats. That is why we traveled in secret. That is why we came to you." James leaned back, absorbing the enormity of the situation. He realized that their arrival at his ranch had not been a coincidence. They had chosen him, a stranger, as their protector because they believed in his character. And now the responsibility rested on him. He could not let them down. "You are safe here," he said again, trying to reassure them, and perhaps himself. "I may not understand everything about this artifact, but I understand what it means to care for something, to protect something that is important. I will help you." The sisters looked at each other again, silently communicating in ways James could not understand. Then Lila spoke. "We must be careful. We cannot let anyone know where it is. Not now, not ever. The wrong people are always looking for it." James nodded. "We will be careful. I will make sure of it." For the next hour, they talked in careful whispers. James asked only questions that were necessary, avoiding details that might reveal the artifact's location or nature. He wanted to understand enough to protect the sisters without endangering them further. He learned that they had faced challenges beyond what most people could imagine. They had been taught from a young age to be cautious, to trust only those who had proven themselves. Their courage was quiet but fierce, and James could see that surviving in a world that did not always understand or accept them had shaped them into formidable young women. As the morning sunlight grew stronger, James felt the full weight of what he had agreed to. He was no longer just a rancher tending his land. He was a protector, a guardian of a secret that could bring danger to his doorstep. And yet, he did not feel fear. He felt resolve. He had chosen to help them, and he would not waver. "You are brave," James said softly, looking at both sisters. I, 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 I. Not many people could carry the burden you carry, but you do it with dignity and courage. That is something I respect deeply." Ayana's eyes shimmered with a mixture of gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It is not easy to trust someone, especially someone we barely know. But we believe in you." James felt a surge of emotion he had not expected. It was a rare thing to be trusted in such a profound way. He realized that the bond forming between them was more than temporary shelter or a passing encounter. This was a connection born of trust, courage, and shared responsibility. The morning passed, and the storm of the previous night had left the desert refreshed and alive. The sky was a brilliant blue, the air crisp and clean. James led the sisters outside to the porch, where the sun warmed their faces. The land stretched endlessly before them, beautiful and harsh at the same time. "We must be careful when we leave," Lila said, her voice serious. "Even though the storm has passed, there are others who might be searching for us. We cannot take risks." James nodded. "I understand. We will plan carefully. You will leave safely when the time is right, and no one will harm you or the artifact while you are here." The sisters glanced at each other again, silently communicating their trust in him.
It was a moment of quiet understanding, a bond formed not just by words, but by shared purpose.
James felt a strange mix of responsibility and honor. These young women had entrusted him with something sacred, and he would not fail them. As the day continued, James began to make preparations. He moved carefully around the ranch, checking doors, securing windows, and creating a sense of order that would help protect the sisters and their secret. He was methodical, relying on years of experience living alone in a place where self-reliance was essential. Every decision he made was guided by one thought: safety. Meanwhile, the sisters stayed close, observing his actions, offering small suggestions, but largely trusting him to take the lead. James noticed how their eyes carried the weight of past struggles, the vigilance of those who had learned to survive in difficult circumstances. And yet, beneath that vigilance, there was a softness, a hope, that perhaps for the first time in a long while they were truly safe. By evening, a routine had formed. James cooked a simple meal, and they ate together quietly, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken thoughts. The desert outside was calm now, the air warm and dry, and the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. James could not help but glance at the sisters, marveling at their resilience, their courage, and the trust they had placed in him. As night fell once again, the fire crackled warmly, and the three sat together in silence for a while. The bond between them had deepened, and James knew that what had begun as a single night of shelter was now something much more significant. The sisters' secret was heavy, dangerous, and sacred, but he had accepted it, and with that acceptance came a responsibility he would carry with care and courage. For the first time, James understood that life often brings unexpected encounters, moments that test character, demand courage, and reveal truths about the world and about oneself. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the events of this day, the trust of these two sisters, and the secret they carried, would leave a mark on him forever. The next morning dawned with a calm that almost felt too perfect. The storm from days before had completely passed, leaving the desert bathed in golden light. James McCall was already awake, moving quietly through the ranch, feeding the animals and checking the fences. The sisters, Lila and Ayana, had risen as well, their expressions more relaxed but still alert. They were beginning to trust James, yet the weight of their secret never left them. Over breakfast, James noticed the subtle ways they scanned the horizon, as if watching for unseen eyes. He understood immediately. Their lives had taught them vigilance. Danger could come without warning, and even a small lapse could be costly. "Ah, we need to be cautious today," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "We can't let anyone see anything unusual. The more ordinary our movements, the safer you are." Lila nodded, her dark eyes serious. "We know. That is why we came to you. You understand responsibility." Ayana added softly, We trust you, James, but we cannot underestimate the danger. James felt a mixture of pride and concern. The sisters were brave, but he knew that courage alone could not protect them. They needed careful planning, strategy, and above all, discretion. He decided to spend the day preparing, turning the ranch into a secure haven without alarming the sisters with unnecessary details. He started with the barn. He checked every lock, every window, making sure the structure could serve as a temporary refuge if needed. He moved quietly, his long experience with the land guiding him. He also checked the trails surrounding the ranch, noting the places where someone could approach unnoticed. The desert was vast, but that very vastness could be used against them if they were not careful. By mid-morning, James gathered the sisters. "We need a plan," he said. "The artifact is safe as long as we are careful, but we cannot stay in one place too long if someone comes looking. We will need signals, safe spots, and a way to move quickly if we must." Lila listened intently, her hands folded tightly in her lap.
"We have thought about this," she said, "but we have never had to rely on anyone outside our community before."
"It is new for us." James nodded. "That is why you have me now. We will work together. You teach me what you know, and I will do the rest. Safety is a shared responsibility." The sisters agreed, and together they mapped out the property, marking safe spots, escape routes, and places to hide if someone approached. James was impressed by their knowledge of the land and the instincts they had developed over years of careful vigilance. It was clear that, despite their youth, they were capable and intelligent, able to think quickly under pressure. As the afternoon sun rose higher, a sense of unease settled over the ranch. James had been moving around the property, checking the perimeter, when he spotted something unusual: tracks in the dust leading toward the house. They were faint, but they were there. Someone had been near the property recently. He called the sisters quietly. "I think we may have visitors," he said, keeping his voice calm. "Someone has been here. We do not know if they are dangerous, but we must assume the worst." Lila's eyes widened slightly, and Ayana's hand gripped her sister's arm. "We feared this," Lila whispered. "We thought someone might be following us." James nodded. "We cannot panic, but we need to be cautious. I want you both to stay inside the house while I check the perimeter. If anyone approaches, we will move to the barn. It is safer and easier to defend." The sisters agreed, and James moved quietly around the property, scanning the horizon and listening for any sign of movement. The desert was vast, but even a single pair of eyes could be dangerous if they were searching for the sisters. He noticed the tracks continued for a short distance and then faded, suggesting that whoever had come by had left quickly. But James knew better than to assume the threat had disappeared. The desert could hide many things, and danger often returned when least expected. By evening, the tension had grown. The sisters stayed close, their conversations cautious and deliberate. James decided it was time to teach them some strategies to protect themselves in case someone approached again. "We need to think ahead," he said. "You may not be used to being outside the community, but you have the instincts. I can teach you how to use the environment to your advantage, how to move quietly, how to stay unseen, and how to create signals if danger comes." Lila and Ayana listened intently, absorbing every word. They practiced quietly, moving around the house and barn, learning to use the terrain as a shield. James was impressed by their ability to adapt, to combine their natural instincts with the strategies he suggested. They were quick learners, and he realized that together they could be stronger than any one of them alone. Night fell again, and the desert became a vast, dark expanse. James lit the fire in the house, and the three sat close, sharing stories to keep their minds calm. The sisters were careful not to reveal too much, but they spoke of their life in their community, the traditions they cherished, and the lessons their parents had taught them.
John W.L.
James listened with respect, feeling more connected to them than he had ever felt with anyone outside his own family. Then, just as the moon reached its peak, a distant sound broke the quiet, a soft, deliberate rustle among the trees at the edge of the property. James's heart raced. He signaled to the sisters to stay calm and quietly moved toward the window. There, in the shadow of the trees, he saw a figure moving slowly, watching the house. "Someone is out there," he whispered to the sisters. "We may need to move quickly." Lila's eyes were sharp now, her instincts alert. "We must go to the barn," she said calmly. "It is safer." James nodded, and together they moved, silently and carefully, to the barn. Inside, James had prepared a small area with supplies, blankets, and tools that could help them if they needed to stay hidden for a time. The sisters settled in, tense but ready, trusting James to lead them through whatever came next. The figure outside moved closer, but James kept watch, remaining calm and focused. He realized that the person might not yet know the sisters were inside. They needed to stay quiet, patient, and careful. One wrong move could give them away. Hours passed, and the figure eventually retreated, moving back into the darkness of the desert. James waited a long time to make sure they were truly alone before signaling to the sisters that it was safe to come out. "We must be more careful from now on," he said.
They are looking for something.
"And we are the ones keeping it safe." The sisters nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This was not a simple problem of travel or shelter anymore. The artifact they protected could bring danger not just to them, but to James as well. He felt a surge of resolve. "We will stay vigilant," he said, "and together we will protect it, no matter what it takes." For the rest of the night they remained alert, but a sense of teamwork and unity had formed. James realized that this was no longer just about protection. It was about trust, courage, and the bond that had grown between them. The sisters were no longer strangers seeking refuge. They were partners in a shared mission, and James felt a fierce determination to ensure their safety. As the night stretched on, the desert outside remained quiet, but James knew that this calm was temporary. Danger could return at any moment, but he also knew that with careful planning, patience, and trust, they could face it together. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that he was not alone. Not in the responsibility he carried, and not in the quiet, vast expanse of the land he called home. In the stillness of the barn, with the fire casting warm shadows across the walls, James, Lila, and Ayanna understood something vital. Courage alone was not enough. They needed vigilance, strategy, and above all, trust in each other. And they had all three. The morning sun rose gently over the horizon, painting the desert in soft shades of gold and pink. The storm from days before was a distant memory, leaving behind a calm and quiet world. James McCall rose early, as was his habit, moving quietly through the ranch. He tended to the animals, checked the fences, and prepared a simple breakfast. But today, his thoughts were elsewhere. Today, the sisters, Lila and Ayanna, would leave. The past few days had been intense. They had shared meals, stories, and even moments of quiet laughter. They had planned and trained together, learned from each other, and grown to trust one another in ways that few people ever do. James had felt a connection forming that went beyond mere friendship. It was a bond born of trust, responsibility, and shared experience, one that would leave a lasting mark on him. As he prepared breakfast, He glanced toward the small living room where the sisters were sitting near the fire. Their expressions were calm but tinged with sadness. Departure always carried a weight, no matter how necessary it was. James felt a mix of pride and melancholy. He had witnessed their courage, shared in their secrets, and learned lessons about trust and resilience that he would carry for the rest of his life. "Good morning," he said softly as he entered the room with 2 cups of coffee and a plate of bread and cheese. "I thought we could have one last breakfast together before you leave." Lila looked up at him, a faint smile on her face. "Thank you, James."
For everything, she said quietly. Ayana nodded in agreement, her hands folded neatly in her lap.
"You have kept your word. We feel safe here, more than we have anywhere else." James poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from them. "It has been my honor," he said. "You trusted me with something sacred, and I hope I have proven worthy of that trust." The sisters exchanged a glance, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. Their shared history, though brief, had created a bond stronger than any explanation could convey. They had faced challenges, dangers, and unknown threats together, and they had come through it with courage and wisdom. After breakfast, they packed their belongings carefully. Their movements were deliberate, measured, a reflection of the vigilance that had carried them through the past few days. James watched quietly, giving them space but ready to help if needed. Every item they packed seemed simple, but he knew each held significance, memories, or practical use for their journey. Before leaving, Lila approached James. "We must go now," she said softly. "But know that you will always be part of our story. You have changed our lives as we hope we have changed yours." James felt a lump in his throat.
You have more than you realize.
"I have learned from you both about courage, trust, and the strength that comes from caring for others. I will never forget this." Ayana stepped forward, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "Take care of yourself, James. And remember that bravery is not always about facing danger. It is also about opening your heart, even when it is difficult."
James nodded, understanding the depth of her words.
He had spent years in solitude, avoiding connections to protect himself from pain. But these sisters had shown him that trust and openness, though risky, brought meaning and purpose. The 3 of them stepped outside. The desert stretched endlessly before them, golden and warm under the morning sun. James guided them to the edge of the property, where the trails led back toward their community. For a brief moment, they stood together in silence, taking in the vast beauty of the land that had witnessed their trials and their bond. "Remember what we taught you about moving safely," James said, a note of seriousness in his voice. "Use the paths we marked, stay alert, and trust each other. That is the best protection you have." Lila smiled faintly. "And we will carry the memory of this place and of you with us. Always." They began their journey, walking carefully along the trail James had shown them. At first, the steps were slow, deliberate, as if each footfall was a way to remember the safety and care they had received. The sisters moved with the grace and alertness of those accustomed to navigating the world carefully, yet their expressions carried a sense of peace. For the first time in days, they seemed free of immediate worry. James watched them disappear into the distance, his heart heavy yet full. He knew they were strong, capable, and prepared for the challenges ahead, but he could not shake the feeling that he would miss them more than he expected. Their presence had brought warmth, energy, and life into his quiet world, and their departure left an emptiness he had not felt in years. After they had gone, James returned to the ranch, closing the gate behind them. The house was quiet now, the air still and calm. He walked slowly to the window and gazed out at the desert. The horizon stretched endlessly, and though the land was the same, everything felt different. The experience of the past days had changed him. He had seen courage in its purest form, trust in its most fragile state, and the power of connection in moments of danger and uncertainty. He moved back into the living room. Sitting in his chair by the fire, the blankets the sisters had used still lay folded neatly in the corner, and the coffee cups from breakfast sat on the table. Every object reminded him of their presence, of the bond they had shared, and of the lessons he had learned. He realized that the desert, which had always been a place of solitude and routine, now held memories of trust, courage, and human connection. James thought about the artifact they had protected together, a secret he would never reveal. He understood that its significance was not just in its physical form, but in the way it had brought people together, forged trust, and inspired courage. The memory of the sisters, their bravery, and their reliance on one another would remain with him, quietly shaping his life in ways he could not yet measure. The days following their departure were quieter than he expected. The ranch returned to its usual rhythms, and the animals required his attention, as always. Yet James found himself thinking about the sisters often, recalling their stories, their expressions, and the strength they carried. The encounter had opened a part of his heart that he had long kept closed. He realized that life's value was measured not just in routine and solitude, but in the connections we form, the trust we offer, and the courage we witness in others. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, James walked to the edge of his property, looking out over the desert. He imagined the sisters traveling safely along the trails he had shown them, carrying their secret with care, moving forward with courage and hope. A sense of peace settled over him. Though he would never see them again, their presence had left an indelible mark. He returned to the house, sitting by the fire once more, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The storm, the night of trust, the threats they had faced together, all of it had been a lesson in the fragility and strength of life. James understood that some encounters, however brief, had the power to change a person forever, and this one had changed him. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the clear desert sky, James felt a quiet gratitude. He had been tested, challenged, and entrusted with a sacred responsibility. He had faced uncertainty and danger, and through it all, he had formed a bond that transcended words. Though the sisters were gone, the lessons they had imparted and the courage they had shown would remain with him, guiding him through the days ahead.